I never thought I'd have to run away from the man I once trusted. The sound of my baby's cries echoed through the silent room, but just moments later, I felt Rowan's hand grab my hair, yanking it back. Before I could react, a sharp slap hit my face, leaving me stunned and tearful. "This is for your own good, Emma," he muttered coldly. Everything I once believed in seemed to collapse in that moment. Could I ever live in this house again? Would I be able to keep my family safe? The room was eerily quiet, save for the sharp sound of my baby's cries. And then, without warning, I felt a sudden, painful tug on my hair. Before I could even react, Rowan, my husband, jerked my head back, slapping me across the face with force. A wave of pain surged through my cheek and my vision blurred with tears. I tried to steady myself, my hands instinctively clutching my son, pulling him closer as if to shield him from this. My heart thudded in my chest, a mix of fear and disbelief swirling within me. "This is for your own good, Emma," he muttered, his voice cold and devoid of any compassion. I couldn't grasp how everything had unraveled so quickly. I'm Willow, 30 years old and a new mother. It's a roller coaster of emotions, exhilarating and overwhelming in equal measure as I navigate the complexities of raising a newborn. The first days at home with my baby were a mix of joy and exhaustion. While I was thrilled to have my son, I hadn't fully understood how challenging it would be to recover from childbirth, manage the house, and take care of my baby all at once. The house was far from perfect. Laundry piled up, dishes lingered in the sink, and I struggled to carve out a moment for myself, consumed with meeting my baby's needs every minute. One afternoon, while I rocked my crying son in my arms, the doorbell rang. I hadn't been expecting anyone, so I was surprised to see my mother-in-law Lavender standing at the door. As she entered, her eyes swept over the disarray, scattered toys, clutter everywhere, and the dishes still piled high in the kitchen. It wasn't how I had hoped she would see our home, but with everything going on, tidying up had been the last thing on my mind. Lavender's gaze fixed on me, and I could feel the judgment in her eyes, mixed with concern. "I thought I'd come by to check on you," she said, stepping over a stray toy on the floor. "Ashton mentioned you might need help." "Thanks, Lavender," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady, though my nerves were frayed. "Things are just a little hectic right now, but we're managing." Lavender didn't seem convinced. She moved into the kitchen, the sound of the unwashed dishes clinking together amplifying my discomfort. "It seems like you need more than a little help," she said, her tone sharp. "This place is a mess. Is this how you plan to raise my grandson?" Her words pierced me, and in that instant, a surge of frustration, sadness, and anxiety flooded through me. I had been giving everything I had to keep it together, but right then, it felt like I was failing in every way. "I'm doing the best I can," I answered, clutching my son tighter as if protecting him from her judgment. Lavender let out a long sigh, clearly unimpressed. "Willow, being a mother is about priorities, and right now, it doesn't look like you've got your priorities straight." Before I could respond, Ashton entered, sensing the tension in the air. He stepped in quickly, trying to ease the situation. "Mom, Willow's doing an incredible job," he said, defending me. "It's been tough, especially with the baby not sleeping well." But instead of diffusing the tension, Lavender's attention shifted to Ashton. Her voice grew more serious. "You need to help her see what's important here. It's not just about cleaning the house, it's about responsibility. She's not meeting the family's standards." I could see Ashton was caught in the middle. He looked at me, then back at his mother, unsure of what to say. "Mom, let's not do this right now. Willow is still recovering." But Lavender cut him off. "That's exactly the time when discipline needs to be taught," she said, her voice rising. "If she learns to manage things now, she'll be better off in the future. You can't be too easy on her, Ashton." I was stunned when Ashton hesitated and then finally said, "Maybe you're right, Mom. Maybe Willow does need to learn the hard way." Hearing those words from my husband felt like a punch to the gut. I couldn't believe he would side with his mother. especially when he had seen how hard I was trying. Lavender gave a firm nod as if she had won the argument. She pushed Ashton toward me, saying, "Show her that this kind of behavior can't be tolerated." In that moment, I felt completely overwhelmed. It wasn't just the physical exhaustion or the mess around the house. It was the feeling of being judged and misunderstood by the people who were supposed to support me. Motherhood was already hard, and I was doing my best. But it felt like nothing was enough for Lavender. That day made me realize how important it is to have a support system that understands what new mothers go through. It's not just about keeping the house clean or meeting family standards. It's about doing your best even when things feel overwhelming, and having people who lift you up instead of tearing you down. I barely had time to react before Ashton grabbed my hair, roughly pulling me toward him and slapped me hard across the face. The sound echoed through the room, loud and shocking. It was a moment I'll never forget, a line that should never have been crossed. I held our baby boy close, his cries mixing with the sound of my racing heartbeat. "Ashton, what are you doing?" I managed to ask through tears. The pain from the slap was nothing compared to the pain of betrayal. I couldn't believe this was happening. "This is for your own good, Willow," Ashton said, his voice flat and empty. He didn't even look me in the eyes. "You need to learn." The room fell silent. The only sound was the soft whimpers of our son. Ashton glanced at me, his face showing a mix of frustration and embarrassment, but it didn't feel like an apology. Lavender, his mother, stood there with a stern expression, not saying a word, but her presence alone was enough to make things worse. She didn't move, didn't flinch. She just stood there watching, as if she had expected this to happen. What was meant to be a visit for support had twisted into something entirely different. Instead of comfort, I was met with judgment, and now, a slap that shattered everything I thought I knew about family. It felt as though the very foundation of my world was collapsing. As Lavender made her way to the door, she whispered something to Ashton. I couldn't catch all of it, but the smugness in her expression and the worry in Ashton's eyes told me everything I needed to know. The air between us had turned cold, and I could feel it settling deep into my chest, a heavy weight I couldn't shake. That night, after the storm of emotions had passed, I rocked my son to sleep, trying to calm both him and myself. But the dread clung to me, refusing to let go. What was supposed to be a loving family now felt like something foreign, a place of judgment where I was put on trial and found wanting. It was as if I was failing them, no matter how hard I tried. As I held my son close, a decision began to take shape in my mind. I needed to leave, not just for my own safety, but for his as well. The house that once felt like a home now felt more like a prison, built by the very people who were supposed to love and protect us. I realized I couldn't raise my son here, not with Ashton's actions and Lavender's ever-present influence looming over us. He had crossed a line, and I couldn't trust him anymore. I couldn't bear to sleep next to Ashton that night. Instead, I took my baby to the nursery, the small room that had become my sanctuary these past few weeks. As I sat in the rocking chair, my son in my arms, the events of the day played over and over in my mind. Each time the memories resurfaced, the pain and betrayal only deepened. I knew without a doubt that I couldn't stay. The next morning, with Ashton at work and Lavender thankfully gone, I picked up the phone. Rebecca, a close friend who had offered help before, answered quickly. "Becca, it's me. I need the help you offered," I said, my voice trembling with a mix of fear and resolve. "Say no more, Willow," Rebecca replied calmly. "I'll be there today with my truck. We'll move your things to my place until you figure out your next steps." We devised a simple but risky plan. I would pack as much as I could during the day, just the essentials for me and my son. Rebecca would come by in the evening, and we would move everything out quietly before Ashton returned. I knew I couldn't face him again, not after what had happened. It was too dangerous to stay, and I couldn't risk him or Lavender discovering what I was planning. As I packed, my heart raced, but I knew this was the only option. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about my son. He deserved a safe, loving environment, free from violence, control, and manipulation. Leaving was terrifying, but staying would have been worse. This was the beginning of a new chapter 1 where we could both breathe and my son could grow up in peace. I stood still, contemplating the consequences of facing Ashton again. He might try to apologize, or worse, Lavender might convince him to tighten his grip on me. I couldn't let that happen. I knew I had to leave. As I packed, each baby outfit, each toy, felt heavier than the last, weighed down by the memories of a life I had once dreamed of. The life I had wanted with Ashton. But the sharp sting of his slap and Lavender's cold, judgmental gaze reminded me staying wasn't an option anymore. By late afternoon, most of my things were packed into boxes. I hid everything in the garage, trying to stay calm and focused. Rebecca, my best friend, arrived just as the sun began to set. Her arrival felt like a glimmer of hope in what had been one of the hardest days of my life. "Are you ready?" Rebecca asked as she stepped inside, looking at the boxes and bags scattered around. "As ready as I'll ever be," I replied, holding my baby boy a little closer to my chest. I had to do this for him, for both of us. We moved quickly, loading everything into her truck. We worked silently but efficiently, as if we had done this 100 times before. The last room I packed was the nursery. It had been my little sanctuary, the only place in the house where I had felt safe and at peace. I took one last look around, saying a quiet goodbye to the life I had dreamed of having with Ashton. But I knew now that this dream was over. As we drove away, I watched the house fade in the rearview mirror. A chapter in my life was closing, and though my heart felt heavy, I also felt a flicker of hope. My baby slept peacefully in his car seat, unaware of the big change happening. But finally, I knew he was safe. This was the first night of our new life, a life where fear and manipulation no longer had control over us. When we arrived at Rebecca's place, I felt a wave of relief. Her home was filled with warmth and safety, a stark contrast to the oppressive feeling that had taken over my own home. Being there made me even more determined to make sure Ashton and Lavender couldn't hurt us again. I realized that simply leaving wasn't enough. I needed to ensure that they couldn't twist the story in their favor or ever put someone else through what I had experienced. I started by reaching out to family and friends, pretending I just wanted to catch up. During these conversations, I carefully gathered bits of information, slightly recording any mentions of Lavender's controlling behavior or Ashton's strange willingness to follow her lead. Some people were hesitant to talk, but many hadn't realized how deep Lavender's manipulation ran. Over time, I began to collect text messages, voicemails, and even recorded calls that painted a clear picture of what was really happening behind closed doors. The most valuable piece of evidence came when I managed to record a video of Lavender coaching Ashton on how to control me. Her words made it clear that this wasn't about concern or love. It was about power and control. Once I had gathered enough evidence, I decided it was time to confront them. I chose a family gathering hosted by Ashton's sister. It was a neutral place with plenty of family members present. Some of them had already hinted that they were uncomfortable with the way Lavender dominated the family, so I hoped this would be the right time and place to reveal the truth. On the day of the gathering, I was nervous. My hands shook and my heart raced, but I knew this had to be done. I arrived with Rebecca by my side, her support giving me the strength to go through with it. As I walked into the room, I could feel the tension. People greeted me with quiet murmurs, but everyone seemed to know something was off. Word about Ashton and Lavender's behavior had spread through the family, and even the relatives who lived far away had heard rumors. After the initial greetings, I took a deep breath and prepared myself for what was to come. It was time to show everyone who Ashton and Lavender really were, and to finally take control of my life again. I stood up, my hand shaking, but my voice was steady. "I have something important to say," I began as everyone in the room turned to look at me. I could feel all eyes on me, but I knew this had to be done. "It's about Ashton and his mother, Lavender. and how their actions have affected not just me and my son, but the whole family. Ashton looked shocked, and I could see the fear in his eyes as he tried to stop me. "Willow, let's not do this here," he said, trying to interrupt. But I didn't back down. "No," I replied, pulling out my phone. "This is not just a personal issue." I connected my phone to the Bluetooth speaker, and the room fell silent. The recordings began to play. Lavender's cold, controlling voice telling Ashton how to handle me, and Ashton's hesitant agreements. It was all there, plain as day, their plans to fix my behavior. The reactions in the room were immediate. Some people looked shocked, others disgusted. Ashton's aunt, who had always been kind to me, looked heartbroken. She turned to Lavender, her voice shaking. "Is this true, Lavender? Were you really forcing Ashton to do this?" Lavender's face turned red with anger and fear. "These are taken out of context," she snapped, trying to defend herself, but it was too late. Ashton's cousin, who had been quietly observing until now, stood up. "No, they aren't out of context. We've seen signs of this for years, but we didn't want to believe it." That moment changed everything. Family members began to speak up, sharing their own experiences with Lavender's controlling ways. Slowly, a picture emerged of a woman who had manipulated her family for years, hiding behind the role of a caring mother. Ashton sat there in silence, looking pale and overwhelmed, finally seeing the truth about his mother's control over his life. As the family meeting turned into a heated discussion about Lavender's influence, I felt a huge weight lift off my shoulders. The truth was out. It wasn't just me who saw it now. Everyone in the room knew. The family who had been under Lavender's control for so long finally saw her manipulations for what they were. After the confrontation, there was a quiet, somber feeling in the air. The family, long under Lavender's influence, now had to come to terms with what had been going on for years. The shock was clear on their faces, and it was uncomfortable for everyone to realize how deeply Lavender had affected their lives. For me, the decision to leave Ashton was painful, but it was also necessary. After everything that had happened, there was no going back. As the family began to leave, I gathered my son, who was blissfully unaware of the storm around him. With one last look at the family home, I stepped into the unknown, knowing I was doing the right thing for us. Ashton watched us leave, his face filled with sadness and regret. His voice, once so familiar, now felt distant as he whispered a weak goodbye. I didn't look back. Lavender, on the other hand, faced a much harsher reality. The family that Lavender had once held under her thumb finally saw her for who she truly was. They began to pull away, the weight of the harm her actions had caused becoming undeniable. No amount of her attempts to regain control could change the truth. The evidence from the recordings and the testimonies shared at the gathering had been overwhelming, and no one could ignore it any longer. In the weeks that followed, Ashton reached out to me repeatedly. His messages overflowed with apologies, promises of change, and pleas for forgiveness. But the image of his raised hand and the influence his mother had over him were too ingrained in my memory to forgive so easily. The trust between us had been shattered, and with it, the bond of our marriage. I understood then that this was the closing of one chapter and the painful but necessary start of another. I wasn't just leaving behind a toxic situation. I was beginning a new life, one where I could be free from control and fear, where I could raise my son in an environment built on love and safety. I found a small apartment far from the neighborhood I once called home. It was a fresh start, a place where no one knew my story, and I could leave the past behind. My friend Rebecca stood by me through it all, offering her unwavering support as I began the slow process of rebuilding. My days became simpler, yet filled with purpose. Caring for my son consumed most of my time, but I also focused on putting the pieces of my life back together. The healing process was anything but easy. It was slow, and at times, the pain felt almost unbearable. There were days when the weight of everything I had been through threatened to swallow me whole. But the newfound freedom to make my own choices, to no longer live in fear of manipulation, kept me moving forward. It felt like a fresh start, an opportunity to live on my terms. I began therapy, where I confronted the emotional scars I had carried for so long. I also joined support groups for single mothers, and connecting with others who understood my pain helped me feel less isolated. Slowly, the pieces of who I once was began to come back together. Though I wasn't the same person I had been before, I was stronger now, more resilient. I had learned how to stand up for myself, and most importantly, how to protect my son from any harm. His laughter became my anchor, lifting me through even the darkest moments. Watching him grow and hit new milestones filled me with a sense of purpose and joy, and with each little victory, I felt more hopeful for the future. As he took his first steps and said his first words, I too found myself taking steps toward healing and reclaiming my life. Months passed, and before I realized it, a year had gone by. One evening, after putting my son to bed, I sank into the couch in our cozy living room, surrounded by his drawings and toy symbols of the happy life we were building together. I couldn't help but reflect on how far we had come. The pain of the past still lingered like a shadow, but it no longer held the same power over me. The light of new beginnings now shone brighter, and the support of friends like Rebecca, along with the unconditional love of my son, gave me strength. As I sipped a cup of tea that night, it struck me I was ready to share my story. I started a blog as a space where I could write about everything I had been through. It wasn't just for me, but for others who might be facing similar struggles. I wanted to reach out to those who felt trapped in manipulation or abuse, to let them know they weren't alone. Every blog post I wrote became a step away from the victim I once was, and a step closer to becoming someone who could help others. Reflecting on my journey, I realized I had grown into an advocate. I had found my voice, and now I was using it to speak out against the very control and manipulation I had once endured. My story was one of resilience, a testament to finding strength in the face of adversity. But how far is too far when love and control blur into violence? When does standing up for yourself become an act of rebellion in a relationship built on manipulation and fear? In that moment, as I stood there clutching my baby, the truth hit me harder than the slap. I had been living in denial, convincing myself that Rowan's behavior was just a phase. But it wasn't. He wasn't the man I had married. I was living with a stranger, someone who would rather hurt me than help. The deeper I thought about it, the clearer it became. I couldn't stay. My son deserved more than to be raised in a home where fear loomed at every corner. Could I continue living with a man who had shown me no respect, no compassion? But here's the question. Was leaving the right choice? Should I have stayed and fought for my family or stood up for myself even if it meant leaving everything behind? In my situation, there was no easy answer, only the cold reality that something had to change. Would you have done the same? Would you walk away from someone who was once your world? Or would you try to fight for what you believed was love? Let me know what you think in the comments. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps keep these important conversations going.
My name is Angela, and I've always been the type to avoid office mixers like the plague. But tonight, as I stood in the corner of our company's dimly lit bar, nursing a gin and tonic I didn't want, I had no idea my life was about to change forever. "You're not like the others," a deep voice said beside me. I turned to see a tall, muscular man with piercing blue eyes. "And that makes you dangerous." I raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me?" He grinned, extending his hand. "I'm Wesley, and I mean it as a compliment. Everyone else here is busy schmoozing and climbing the corporate ladder. You look like you'd rather be anywhere else." I shook his hand, surprised by the warmth of his grip. "Angela, and you're not wrong. I'm only here because my boss made it mandatory." Wesley leaned against the bar, his eyes never leaving mine. "So, Angela, what would you rather be doing on a Friday night?" "Honestly, I'd be at the gym, then curled up with a good book." His eyes lit up. A woman after my own heart. Former rugby player here. What's your poison? Weights or cardio? For the next hour, Wesley and I talked about everything from our favorite workout routines to our career aspirations. It was refreshing to have a conversation that didn't revolve around office politics or the latest reality TV drama. So, why'd you quit rugby? I asked, genuinely curious. Wesley's smile faltered for a moment. Injury. Tore my ACL. My sister nursed me back to health, but by then, my shot at the pros was gone. I'm sorry, I said, noticing the flash of pain in his eyes. That must have been tough. He shrugged. It was. But it led me here, so I can't complain too much. As the night wore on, I found myself drawn to Wesley's easy charm and genuine interest in what I had to say. It had been a long time since I'd felt this kind of connection with someone. Listen, Wesley said as the crowd began to thin. I know this might be forward, but would you like to grab coffee sometime? Outside of this stuffy work environment. I hesitated. My last relationship had ended badly, and I'd sworn off dating for a while. But something about Wesley felt different. I'd like that, I heard myself say. Wesley's face lit up. Great. How about tomorrow morning? There's this little cafe on 5th that does amazing avocado toast. As we exchanged numbers, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was stepping into something bigger than just a coffee date. Wesley's earlier words echoed in my mind. You're not like the others. And that makes you dangerous. Little did I know just how dangerous I would become, not just to Wesley's heart, but to the carefully constructed world his family had built around him. The next morning, I stood outside the cafe, debating whether to go in or turn tail and run. My phone buzzed with a text from Wesley. Hope you're still coming. I promise I don't bite. Unless you're into that sort of thing, winky face. I laughed despite myself and pushed open the door. Wesley was already there, 2 steaming mugs on the table in front of him. I took a chance and ordered you a latte, he said as I sat down. Hope that's okay. I took a sip, pleasantly surprised. Perfect, actually. How'd you guess? He winked. I have a sixth sense about these things. As we talked, I found myself opening up more than I had in years. Wesley listened intently, asking thoughtful questions and sharing his own experiences. You know, he said as we finished our coffee, I have to admit something. I saw you at the office a few weeks ago and have been trying to work up the courage to talk to you ever since. I felt a blush creep up my cheeks. Really? Why didn't you say anything sooner? Wesley's eyes grew serious. I've had some complicated relationships in the past. I wanted to make sure I was ready before jumping into anything new. There was something in his tone that made me wonder what he wasn't saying, but I pushed the thought aside. For the first time in a long time, I was excited about the possibility of a new relationship. As we left the cafe, Wesley caught my hand. Angela, I know this might be too soon, but I'd really like to see you again. I squeezed his hand, ignoring the warning bells in the back of my mind. I like that too, Wesley. Little did I know, that simple decision would set in motion a chain of events that would test my strength, my love, and my very sanity in ways I could never have imagined. The weeks following our first coffee date flew by in a whirlwind of shared laughter, intense workouts, and late-night conversations. Wesley and I fell into an easy rhythm, our connection deepening with each passing day. I can't believe how natural this feels, I said one evening as we strolled through the park, our fingers intertwined. Wesley squeezed my hand. I know what you mean. It's like I've known you forever. But as our relationship blossomed, I couldn't shake the feeling that Wesley was holding something back. Whenever the topic of his family came up, a shadow would cross his face. Tell me about your sister. I prodded gently one night over dinner. You mentioned she raised you? Wesley's fork paused halfway to his mouth. Vivian? She's intense. After our mom died, she took on the role of both sister and mother. We're close, but it's complicated. I sensed there was more to the story, but I didn't push. Instead, I changed the subject. Speaking of family, my parents are dying to meet you. How about dinner at their place this weekend? Relief flooded Wesley's face. I'd love that. Saturday evening found us on my parents' doorstep, a bottle of wine in Wesley's hand. My mother flung open the door before we could knock. "Angela, darling." She enveloped me in a hug before turning to Wesley. "And you must be the young man we've heard so much about." My father appeared behind her, extending his hand.
Come in, come in.
"I hope you like lasagna, Wesley. It's Angela's favorite." As we settled around the dining table, I watched with growing warmth as Wesley charmed my parents. He complimented my mother's cooking, discussed rugby with my father, and even offered to help with the dishes. "So, Wesley," my father said as we lingered over dessert, "Angela tells us you work in finance?" Wesley nodded. "Yes, sir. I started as an intern right out of college and worked my way up." "Impressive," my mother chimed in. "And your family? Are they in the area?" I felt Wesley tense beside me. "It's just my sister and me. Our parents passed away when I was young." My mother's face softened. "Oh, I'm so sorry, dear. That must have been difficult." Wesley managed a small smile. "It was, but Vivian stepped up. She's been my rock." As we said our goodbyes later that evening, my parents pulled me aside. "He's a keeper, Angela," my mother whispered. "Don't let this one go." In the car ride home, Wesley was uncharacteristically quiet. "Everything okay?" I asked, reaching for his hand. He nodded, but his eyes remained fixed on the road. "Your parents are great. It's just being there, seeing that kind of normal family dynamic. It made me realize how different my upbringing was." I squeezed his hand. "Wesley, you can talk to me about it, you know. I want to understand." He sighed heavily. "It's not easy to explain, Vivian.
She's more than just a sister to me.
She's been my whole world for so long. Sometimes I wonder if I even know who I am without her influence." A chill ran down my spine at his words, but I pushed the feeling aside. "Maybe it's time I met her," I suggested. "If she's such an important part of your life, I want to know her too." Wesley's grip on the steering wheel tightened. "Yeah, maybe. I'll talk to her about setting something up." As we pulled up to my apartment, Wesley turned to me, his eyes intense. "Angela, I need you to know something. What we have, it's special. I've never felt this way about anyone before. But my relationship with Vivian, it's complicated. I just hope you can be patient with me as I figure it all out." I leaned in, kissing him softly. "We'll figure out together, I promised." Little did I know, those words would be put to the test sooner than I could have imagined. As I watched Wesley drive away, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was standing on the edge of something much bigger and more complex than I had bargained for. But for Wesley, I was willing to take the leap. The day of the family dinner arrived, and my stomach was in knots as Wesley and I pulled up to Vivian's house. It was a stately Victorian, impeccably maintained, with a manicured lawn that screamed perfection. "Ready?" Wesley asked, squeezing my hand. I nodded, forcing a smile. "As I'll ever be." The front door swung open before we reached it, revealing a striking woman with Wesley's piercing blue eyes. "Little brother," she exclaimed, pulling Wesley into a tight embrace. Over his shoulder, her gaze locked onto mine, assessing. "You must be Angela," Vivian said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "We've heard so much about you." As we stepped inside, a tall, handsome man appeared from the kitchen. "I'm Sterling," he introduced himself, his charm palpable. Vivian's better half. The house was immaculate, every surface gleaming. Family photos adorned the walls, most featuring Wesley and Vivian. I noticed the absence of their parents in any recent pictures. "Dinner's almost ready," Vivian announced. "Wesley, why don't you give Angela the tour?" As Wesley led me through the house, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every room seemed to hold a piece of Wesley's past, carefully curated by Vivian. "And this is my old room," Wesley said, pushing open a door. It was like stepping into a time capsule. Trophies lined the shelves, and posters of rugby stars covered the walls. "Vivian's kept it exactly the same," he explained, a hint of discomfort in his voice. Back in the dining room, Vivian was laying out an impressive spread. "I hope you like roast chicken, Angela. It's Wesley's favorite." "It looks delicious," I said, taking my seat. "Is there anything I can do to help?" Vivian waved me off. "No need. I know exactly how Wesley likes things." Throughout dinner, Vivian peppered me with questions about my job, my family, and my relationship with Wesley. Each answer seemed to be met with a subtle look of disapproval. "So, Angela," Vivian said, refilling my wine glass, "Wesley mentioned you have some food allergies. I hope I haven't included anything problematic." "Oh, it's just shellfish," I replied. "I'm fine with everything else." Vivian's eyes glinted. "Good to know. We wouldn't want any accidents." As dessert was served, a decadent chocolate cake, Sterling regaled us with stories from his bar. I noticed how he kept touching Vivian's arm, how she leaned into him. Yet her eyes rarely left Wesley. "Remember when you used to help out at the bar, Wes?" Sterling asked. "The ladies loved having you behind the counter." Wesley shifted uncomfortably. "That was a long time ago." "Oh, but you were so good at it," Vivian chimed in.
Always that charm.
I felt a prickle of unease. There was an undercurrent to their words I couldn't quite grasp. As we were finishing our cake, I suddenly felt a tickle in my throat. Within moments, it became difficult to breathe. "Angela?" Wesley's voice was panicked. "What's wrong?" I tried to speak, but my throat was closing up. My vision blurred as I saw Vivian standing over me, her expression unreadable. "Oh dear," she said, her voice distant. "Could there have been shellfish in the sauce?" I was so careful. The next few minutes were a blur of activity. Wesley calling an ambulance, Sterling fetching my EpiPen from my purse, Vivian hovering nearby with a look of concern that didn't quite reach her eyes. As the paramedics loaded me into the ambulance, I caught a glimpse of Vivian comforting a distraught Wesley. "Don't worry," I heard her say. "I'll take care of everything." In the hospital, as the medication took effect and my breathing eased, I replayed the evening in my mind. The careful questions, the loaded glances, the accidental exposure to my allergen. A chilling thought crept in. Had Vivian done this on purpose? As I drifted off to sleep, one thing became clear. My relationship with Wesley was no longer just about us. I was up against a force I hadn't anticipated, a sister whose love for her brother bordered on obsession, and who might go to any lengths to keep him close. The weeks following the disastrous dinner at Vivian's house were tense. Wesley was torn between concern for me and loyalty to his sister, while I grappled with my growing suspicions about Vivian's true nature. "I'm sure it was just an accident," Wesley insisted for the 100th time as we prepared for another visit to his sister's house. "Vivian feels terrible about what happened." I bit my tongue, choosing my words carefully. "I know, but don't you think it's odd that she'd use shellfish in a sauce without mentioning it?" Wesley's jaw tightened. "She's not perfect, Angela, but she'd never intentionally hurt you." I let the subject drop, but as we pulled up to Vivian's immaculate Victorian, dread pooled in my stomach. Vivian greeted us at the door, all smiles and apologies. "Angela, dear, I'm so glad you're feeling better. I've been beside myself with worry." Her words rang hollow, but I forced a smile. "Thank you, Vivian. I'm fine now." As we settled in the living room, Sterling appeared with a tray of drinks. "Special mocktails for everyone," he announced with a wink. "No allergic reactions tonight, I promise." I sipped the fruity concoction cautiously, hyper-aware of every taste and sensation. Dinner proceeded without incident, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, analyzed, judged. It wasn't until dessert that things took a turn. As I bit into the homemade apple pie, a familiar tingling sensation started in my throat. "Is everything all right, Angela?" Vivian asked, her eyes sharp despite her concerned tone. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. But within minutes, my throat began to close, and panic set in. "Wesley," I gasped, fumbling for my purse and the EpiPen inside. Chaos erupted. Wesley shouting for an ambulance, Sterling rushing to find antihistamines, and Vivian hovering nearby, her expression a mask of concern that didn't quite reach her eyes. As the paramedics loaded me into the ambulance for the second time in as many months, I caught a glimpse of Vivian comforting Wesley. "Don't worry, little brother," she cooed. "I'll take care of everything." The hospital visit was mercifully short this time, but it left me shaken and more suspicious than ever. Back at my apartment, Wesley paced anxiously. I don't understand, he muttered. Vivian swears there was nothing in that pie that could have triggered your allergy. I took a deep breath, knowing my next words could change everything. Wesley, I think Vivian might be doing this on purpose. He froze, his face a mix of shock and disbelief.
What?
That's insane, Angela. Why would she do that? I don't know, I admitted. But think about it. 2 severe allergic reactions, both at her house, both after she assured me the food was safe. It's too much of a coincidence. Wesley's face hardened. You're wrong. Vivian would never.
She loves me.
She wants me to be happy. Does she? I challenged. Or does she want you to need her? The argument that followed was brutal. Wesley stormed out, leaving me alone with my fears and suspicions. Over the next few days, I threw myself into research, documenting every interaction with Vivian, every coincidence that had occurred since Wesley and I started dating. A pattern emerged, one of subtle manipulation and calculated moves designed to keep Wesley close and push others away. When Wesley finally returned, his eyes were red-rimmed and conflicted. I talked to some of my exes, he said quietly. They had similar experiences with Vivian. Accidents, misunderstandings, always when things were getting serious between us. My heart ached for him. I'm so sorry, Wesley. I know how much you love her. He nodded, his voice barely a whisper. What do we do now? I took his hand, squeezing it gently. We face this together. We find out the truth, no matter how painful it might be. As we sat there, planning our next move, I realized we were at a crossroads. The path ahead would be difficult, fraught with emotional landmines and painful revelations. But for the first time since meeting Vivian, I felt hope. Wesley was choosing to see the truth, choosing us. Little did we know, Vivian was already planning her next move, one that would push us all to the breaking point. The tension between Wesley and me had been palpable since our confrontation about Vivian. We were treading on eggshells, both afraid to shatter the fragile peace we'd established. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. We should go to Sterling's bar tonight, Wesley suggested one Friday evening. It might help, to see them in a different setting. I hesitated but agreed. Maybe a neutral ground would provide some clarity. The bar was packed when we arrived, the air thick with laughter and the clinking of glasses. Sterling spotted us immediately, his megawatt smile on full display. Wesley, Angela. What a surprise, he called out, ushering us to prime seats at the bar. First rounds on the house. As Sterling mixed our drinks with a flourish, I couldn't help but notice how his eyes kept darting to the door. It wasn't until an hour later that I understood why. Vivian swept in, looking stunning in a form-fitting red dress. Her eyes locked onto Wesley, a possessive gleam in them that made my skin crawl. Little brother, she cooed, embracing Wesley tightly. And Angela, how lovely to see you both. The night progressed with an undercurrent of tension. Vivian monopolized Wesley's attention, while Sterling kept refilling my glass with a wink and a smile. Sterling said, leaning in close as Vivian dragged Wesley onto the dance floor. You're not the first girlfriend of Wesley's to feel this way about Vivian. I stiffened. What do you mean? Sterling's eyes gleamed with something I couldn't quite place. Let's just say Vivian has a way of complicating things. For Wesley's own good, of course. Before I could press further, Sterling was called away to handle a rowdy group. I watched him go, my mind reeling with implications. As the night wore on, I found myself alone at the bar, Wesley still caught in Vivian's orbit on the dance floor. That's when Sterling made his move. You're too good for this, he said, sliding onto the stool next to me. His hand found my knee, squeezing gently. If you were mine, I'd never let Vivian come between us. I jerked away, shocked. What are you doing, Sterling? He leaned in, his breath hot on my ear. Just following the script, sweetheart. It's what Vivian wants. My blood ran cold. What? Sterling's eyes darted to where Vivian and Wesley were locked in an intimate conversation.
She always does this.
Pushes the girlfriends away. Keeps Wesley close. And me? I play my part. I stood abruptly, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. Wesley's head snapped up, his eyes widening as he took in the scene. "Angela," he called out, pushing through the crowd. But I was already moving, desperate for air, for space to process Sterling's revelation. I burst out of the bar, gulping in the cool night air. Wesley caught up to me on the sidewalk. "What happened? Did Sterling say something?" I turned to face him, tears stinging my eyes. "It's all been a lie, Wesley. A manipulation." Sterling just admitted it. Wesley's face paled. "What are you talking about?" "Vivian," I choked out. "She's been orchestrating everything. The accidents, the tension, even Sterling's advances. It's all to keep you close and push everyone else away." Wesley shook his head, denial written across his features. "No, that's not possible. Vivian wouldn't." "Wouldn't what, little brother?" Vivian's voice cut through the night air like a knife. She stood in the bar's doorway, Sterling hovering behind her like a shadow. The moment stretched, taut with unspoken accusations and years of manipulation. Wesley looked between us, his world visibly crumbling around him. "Is it true?" he whispered, his voice breaking. Vivian's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing a desperation that chilled me to the bone. "Everything I've done has been for you, Wesley. To protect you." Wesley stumbled back as if physically struck. "Protect me?" "By sabotaging every relationship I've ever had." Vivian reached for him, but he flinched away. "You don't understand. After Mom and Dad, you're all I have. I couldn't lose you two." As the siblings faced off, years of unspoken resentments bubbling to the surface, I realized we had reached a turning point. The truth was out, ugly and raw. Now Wesley had to make a choice: the sister who had been his whole world, or the future we could build together. The night air crackled with tension as we all waited to see which way the scales would tip. The tension from that night outside Sterling's bar hung over us like a storm cloud for days. Wesley was a shell of himself, torn between the sister who raised him and the truth he could no longer ignore. I walked on eggshells, afraid that one wrong move might shatter our fragile relationship. It was Wesley who finally broke the silence. "We need to talk to Vivian," he said one morning, his voice heavy with resignation. "All of us. Together." I nodded, my heart racing at the thought of confronting Vivian directly. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" Wesley's eyes met mine, a mix of determination and fear swirling in their depths. "I have to be. For us." The drive to Vivian's house was silent, the weight of what was to come pressing down on us both. As we pulled up, I noticed Sterling's car in the driveway. "Did you tell them we were coming?" I asked. Wesley shook his head.
No.
"But somehow, I'm not surprised they're both here." Vivian opened the door before we could knock, her smile brittle. "Wesley, Angela." What an unexpected surprise. We followed her into the living room, where Sterling lounged on the sofa, drink in hand. The air crackled with unspoken tension. "We need to talk," Wesley said, his voice steadier than I expected. "About everything." Vivian's facade cracked for just a moment before she composed herself. "Of course, little brother. What's on your mind?" For the next hour, everything came pouring out. The allergic reactions, the subtle manipulations, Sterling's advances, all of it laid bare. Vivian denied it at first, her voice rising in pitch as she protested her innocence. "How could you think I'd do such things?" she cried, tears welling in her eyes. "Everything I've done has been for you, Wesley." But as Wesley recounted incident after incident, years of coincidences that had driven wedges between him and every woman he'd cared for, Vivian's denials grew weaker. "You don't understand," she whispered, her mask finally crumbling. "After Mom and Dad died, you were all I had left. I couldn't bear the thought of losing you too." Wesley's voice shook as he replied, "So you decided to control every aspect of my life? To sabotage every relationship I've ever had?" Vivian collapsed onto the sofa, her body racked with sobs. "I was protecting you. Those women, they didn't understand you like I do. They would have hurt you, left you, like you're hurting me now." Wesley's words cut through the room like a knife. I watched as years of manipulation and codependency unraveled before my eyes. Sterling, silent until now, finally spoke up. "It's true, mate," he said, unable to meet Wesley's gaze. "All of it. Vivian. She orchestrated everything. The accidents, the misunderstandings, even my part in it all." Wesley stumbled back, as if physically struck. "How could you?" he whispered, his eyes locked on his sister. "How could you do this to me?" Vivian reached for him, desperation etched across her face. "Please, Wesley. You have to understand. I love you. Everything I did out of love." But Wesley recoiled from her touch. "This isn't love, Vivian. This is control. This is fear. And I can't live like this anymore." The room fell silent, save for Vivian's muffled sobs. I stood there, my heart breaking for Wesley even as relief flooded through me. The truth was finally out. Wesley turned to me, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "Angela, I'm so sorry. For everything. Can you ever forgive me for not seeing the truth sooner?" I took his hand, squeezing it gently. "There's nothing to forgive. We're in this together, remember?" He nodded, a small smile breaking through his pain. Then he turned back to Vivian, his voice firm despite the tremor in it. "I love you, Viv. You're my sister, and that will never change. But this, us, it has to change. I need space. Time to figure out who I am without your influence." Vivian's wail of anguish echoed through the house as Wesley led me towards the door. As we stepped outside, I could feel the shift in the air. A chapter was closing, but a new one filled with hope and the promise of a healthier future, was just beginning. Wesley took a deep breath, his hand still clasped tightly in mine. "Let's go home," he said softly. And as we drove away from the house that had held so many secrets, I knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, we would face them together. The months following our confrontation with Vivian were a whirlwind of emotion and change. Wesley and I grew closer, our bond strengthened by the trials we'd faced together. When he proposed on a crisp autumn evening, tears of joy streaming down his face, I knew we were ready to start our new life together. As our wedding day approached, a cautious optimism settled over us. Wesley had maintained minimal contact with Vivian, setting clear boundaries for the first time in his life. She hadn't taken it well, but we hoped time would heal the wounds. The morning of our wedding dawned bright and clear. I stood in the bridal suite, surrounded by my closest friends and my mother, all of us buzzing with excitement. "You look absolutely radiant, sweetheart," my mother said, tears glistening in her eyes as she adjusted my veil. I beamed at her, my heart full. "Thanks, Mom. I can't believe this day is finally here." Just then, my maid of honor burst into the room, her face pale. "Angela, we have a problem." My stomach dropped. "What is it?" She hesitated, wringing her hands. "It's your dress. Someone's destroyed it." The room erupted in gasps and exclamations. I felt the blood drain from my face as I rushed to the closet where my gown had been hanging. Sure enough, it was in tatters, slashed to ribbons. "Vivian," I whispered, a cold certainty settling over me. My mother wrapped her arm around me. "Oh, honey, what are we going to do?" For a moment, panic threatened to overwhelm me. Then, a strange calm washed over me. I'd been preparing for this, hadn't I? Ever since that night at Sterling's bar, I'd known Vivian wouldn't go down without a fight. I turned to my stunned bridal party, a determined smile on my face. "Ladies, remember that backup plan we talked about?" Relief flooded their faces as understanding dawned. My maid of honor rushed to retrieve the garment bag we'd hidden away, just in case. As I slipped into the simple, elegant gown we'd chosen as a contingency, I felt a surge of pride. Vivian might have destroyed my original dress, but she couldn't touch what really mattered, the love Wesley and I shared. Meanwhile, in the groom's suite, chaos of a different kind was unfolding. Wesley paced anxiously, his best man watching with concern. "She's not coming, is she?" Wesley muttered, running a hand through his hair. "Vivian's done something, I know it." Just then, there was a commotion outside. The door burst open, revealing a disheveled Vivian. "Wesley, please," she pleaded, her eyes wild. "You can't go through with this. She's not right for you. Only I understand what you need." Wesley's face hardened. Vivian, stop.
This ends now.
What have you done? Vivian's composure cracked. I only wanted to protect you. The dress. I thought if I could just delay things. Wesley's best man stepped between them. I think you should leave, Vivian.
Now.
As security escorted a sobbing Vivian from the premises, Wesley turned to his best man, determination etched on his face. Find Angela. Make sure she's okay. This wedding is happening no matter what. Back in the bridal suite, I stood before the mirror, taking in my reflection. The backup dress was simpler than my original gown, but as I gazed at myself, I realized it was perfect. It represented everything Wesley and I had been through: resilience, adaptability, and unwavering love. A knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. Angela. Wesley's voice called out. Are you okay? Can I come in? I hesitated for just a moment before answering. Yes, come in. Wesley entered, his eyes widening as he took in the sight of me. Angela, you look breathtaking. I smiled, tears threatening to spill. Vivian? He shook his head.
Gone.
It's just us now. Wesley crossed the room in 2 strides, taking my hands in his. Angela, after everything we've been through, I want you to know, I choose you. Today and every day. No more doubts, no more interference. Just us. I squeezed his hands, my heart overflowing. I choose you too, Wesley. Always. As we made our way to the ceremony, hand in hand, I knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, we would face them together. Vivian's final attempt at sabotage had failed. Our love, tested by fire, had emerged stronger than ever. The wedding march began to play, and as we stepped into our future, I felt a sense of triumph. We had won, not just against Vivian, but against all the doubts and fears that had plagued us. This was our moment, our victory, and nothing could take it away from us. The first year of our marriage flew by in a blissful whirlwind. Wesley and I settled into our new home, relishing the peace that came with our hard-won freedom from Vivian's influence. We threw ourselves into building our life together, focusing on our careers and nurturing our relationship. It was on our first anniversary that the unexpected happened. A letter arrived, postmarked from a small town on the coast. I recognized Vivian's handwriting immediately. Do you want me to read it? Wesley asked, his voice tight with apprehension. I squeezed his hand. Let's do it together. The letter was a revelation. Vivian wrote of her journey over the past year, the therapy she'd undergone, the painful self-reflection, and the realization of the damage she'd caused. She expressed deep remorse for her actions and a desire to make amends, if we were willing. What do you think? I asked Wesley, watching emotions play across his face. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. I don't know. Part of me wants to believe her, but after everything... I nodded, understanding his hesitation. Maybe we could start small. A phone call, perhaps? That phone call led to more conversations, each one a careful dance of boundaries and tentative trust. Vivian had indeed changed. She'd broken things off with Sterling, recognizing the toxicity of their relationship. She'd moved to the coast, starting fresh in a new town where she could focus on her own growth. Months passed, and slowly, cautiously, we allowed Vivian back into our lives. It wasn't easy. There were moments of tension, old habits threatening to resurface. But Vivian was committed to change, and we were committed to giving her a chance. The true test came when we announced we were expecting our first child. I held my breath, waiting for Vivian's reaction. To my surprise, tears of joy filled her eyes. I'm so happy for you both, she said, her voice thick with emotion. And I promise I'll be the best Anne I can be, without overstepping. As my due date approached, Vivian proved true to her word. She offered support without smothering, respecting our boundaries at every turn. When our daughter, Lily, was born, Vivian was there, but she waited patiently in the waiting room until we were ready for visitors. Watching her hold Lily for the first time, I saw a transformation in Vivian. The possessiveness that had once consumed her was gone, replaced by a gentle, nurturing love. She's perfect, Vivian whispered, gazing down at her niece. "You two have created something beautiful." Wesley wrapped his arm around me, his eyes misty. "We all have," he said, including Vivian in the moment. "Our family." As we settled into life with Lily, I marveled at how far we'd come. The journey hadn't been easy, but the rewards were beyond anything I could have imagined. Wesley and I had not only strengthened our bond, but had also helped Vivian find her way to a healthier, more fulfilling life. One evening, as we sat on our porch watching the sunset, Lily cooing softly in my arms, Wesley turned to me with a smile. "You know," he said, "that first night we met, I told you that you were dangerous. I had no idea how right I was." I laughed softly. "Oh, and how exactly was I dangerous?" His eyes softened as he gazed at me. "You were dangerous because you had the power to change everything. My life, Vivian's life, our entire family dynamic. You showed us all what real love looks like, the kind that's strong enough to overcome any obstacle, yet gentle enough to allow for growth and forgiveness." Tears pricked my eyes as I leaned into him. "We did it together," I murmured. As the last rays of sunlight painted the sky in brilliant hues, I felt a profound sense of peace wash over me. We had faced manipulation, betrayal, and near destruction of our relationship. But through it all, our love had not only survived but flourished. Looking at our daughter, at my husband, and thinking of the renewed relationship with Vivian, I knew that this beautiful, imperfect, hard-won family was the greatest victory of all. The journey had been long and fraught with challenges, but as I sat there, surrounded by love, I knew that every step had been worth it. We had not just survived, we had thrived. And the future, once so uncertain, now stretched before us, bright with promise and possibility. My name is Cassandra Harper, but everyone calls me Cassie. I'm a 38-year-old single mom and nurse, and I thought I'd seen it all. But nothing could have prepared me for what I found when I walked into my daughter's room that evening. "Lydia?" I called out, pushing open her door. "Honey, I'm home. How was your day with?" The words died in my throat. My vibrant, curly-haired 15-year-old sat on her bed, tears streaming down her face.
But it wasn't her tears that shocked me.
It was her hair, or rather, the complete lack of it. "Oh my God," I whispered, rushing to her side. "Lydia, what happened?" She looked up at me, her eyes red and puffy. "Grandma Evelyn," she choked out. She said I was turning into a delinquent." My blood ran cold. "Evelyn did this to you?" Lydia nodded, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. I pulled her into my arms, my mind reeling. How could Evelyn, my ex-mother-in-law, do something so cruel? She said my hair was a distraction. Lydia sobbed into my shoulder. That I was spending too much time on it instead of studying. She just grabbed the clippers and I held her tighter, fury building inside me. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart. I'm so sorry." As I comforted my daughter, my phone buzzed. A text from Evelyn. "I've taken care of Lydia's little rebellion. You can thank me later." I nearly threw the phone across the room. Instead, I took a deep breath and turned back to Lydia. "We're going to fix this, okay? I promise." A knock at the front door interrupted us. I kissed Lydia's forehead and went to answer it, finding our neighbor, Grant, on the other side. "Hey, Cassie," he said with a smile that quickly faded when he saw my face. "What's wrong?" I hesitated, then stepped aside to let him in. "It's Lydia. Evelyn." She shaved her head. Grant's eyes widened.
"What?"
"Why would she do that?" "Because she's a controlling monster." I spat, then immediately felt guilty. "I'm sorry, No, don't apologize," Grant said, placing a comforting hand on my arm. "That's awful. Is there anything I can do?" I shook my head, fighting back tears of my own. "I don't know. I don't even know where to start." "Mom?" Lydia's voice called from her room. "Can you come back?" "I should go," I told Grant. "Thank you for checking in." He nodded, concern etched on his face. "I'm here if you need anything, okay?" As I closed the door behind him, my phone buzzed again. This time it was my best friend and coworker, Rosa. "Girl, you will not believe the day I had." Her text read, "Drinks tonight?" I typed back quickly, "Can't. Family emergency." Evelyn shaved Lydia's head. Rosa's response was immediate. "What?" "I'm coming over." I returned to Lydia's room, finding her examining her reflection in a small mirror. "How could she do this, Mom?" she asked, her voice small and broken. I sat beside her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "I don't know, sweetie, but we're going to get through this together, okay?" Lydia leaned into me, nodding slightly. "What are we going to do?" I took a deep breath, my mind racing. How could I protect my daughter from Evelyn's toxic influence when I relied on her for childcare during my long hospital shifts? How could I confront the woman who had been my only support since Eli left? "First," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt, "we're going to find you the coolest hats and scarves in town. And then we're going to have a long talk with Grandma Evelyn." As I held my daughter close, I knew one thing for certain. Things were about to change in the Harper household. And Evelyn had no idea what was coming. The next morning, I stood outside Evelyn's pristine Victorian house, my hands shaking with a mix of rage and anxiety. I'd left Lydia with Rosa, unable to face the thought of bringing her here. Taking a deep breath, I rang the doorbell. Evelyn answered with a smile that quickly faded when she saw my face. "Cassandra, dear, what brings you here so early?" I pushed past her into the foyer. "We need to talk about what you did to Lydia." Evelyn's expression hardened. "I assume you're referring to her haircut." "Really, Cassandra, you should be thanking me." "Thanking you?" I spat. "You shaved my daughter's head without her consent. She needed discipline," Evelyn said, her voice cold. "That girl was becoming unmanageable. Always primping, never studying. I did what needed to be done." I clenched my fists, struggling to maintain composure. "You had no right. Lydia is my daughter, not your personal project." Evelyn's eyes narrowed. "Someone needs to instill proper values in that child. Lord knows you're too busy working to do it yourself."
Her words hit like a slap.
I'd relied on Evelyn for childcare during my long hospital shifts, but at what cost? "Lydia is a wonderful, creative girl," I said, my voice shaking. "She doesn't need to be fixed or controlled. She needs love and support." "Love," Evelyn scoffed. "Love without discipline is what ruins children. Look at what happened with Eli." The mention of my ex-husband sent a jolt through me. "Don't you dare bring Eli into this." "Why not? He's the perfect example of what happens when you let a child run wild. Now he's God knows where, abandoning his responsibilities." I took a step closer to Evelyn, my anger boiling over. "You drove Eli away with your controlling behavior, just like you're trying to do with Lydia. But I won't let you. This ends now." Evelyn's facade cracked for a moment, revealing a flicker of fear. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that you will no longer have unsupervised time with Lydia. If you want to see her, it will be on my terms." "You can't do that," Evelyn hissed. "You need me. Who else will watch Lydia while you're working those ridiculous shifts?" I faltered for a moment, the reality of my situation hitting home. How could I manage without Evelyn's help? As if sensing my doubt, Evelyn pressed on. "Face it, Cassandra. You're in over your head. Lydia needs a firm hand, and I'm the only one willing to provide it." I stood there, torn between my need for childcare and my desire to protect Lydia from Evelyn's toxic influence. The weight of single motherhood pressed down on me, threatening to crush my resolve. But then I thought of Lydia's tear-stained face, her beautiful curls reduced to stubble. I couldn't let this continue. "No," I said, my voice stronger now. "I'll figure something out. But you will not treat Lydia like this ever again." Evelyn's expression hardened. "You're making a mistake, Cassandra. That girl needs guidance, structure. Without it, she'll end up just like her father." "If by that you mean free from your control, then good," I shot back. "Lydia deserves better than this. We both do." As I turned to leave, Evelyn called after me. "You'll be back, Cassandra. You can't do this alone." I paused at the door, looking back at the woman who had been both my support and my tormentor for so long. "Watch me," I said and walked out. As I drove home, my mind raced. How would I manage work and childcare without Evelyn? But beneath the worry, a sense of relief washed over me. For the first time in years, I felt like I was truly standing up for myself and my daughter. Whatever challenges lay ahead, I knew one thing for certain. Lydia and I would face them together, free from Evelyn's suffocating influence. It was time to reclaim our lives and forge our own path. That night, after tucking Lydia into bed, I found myself staring at an old photo album. My fingers traced the outline of a smiling couple, Eli and me on our wedding day. Evelyn's words echoed in my mind. Look at what happened with Eli. I hadn't thought about my ex-husband in months, but now memories flooded back. Eli, always trying to please his mother, always falling short. The arguments, the tension, the feeling of walking on eggshells in our own home. And then one day, he was just
Gone.
a knock at the door startled me from my reverie. I opened it to find Rosa, arms laden with takeout bags. "Thought you could use some comfort food," she said, pushing past me into the kitchen. I smiled gratefully. "You're a lifesaver." As we settled on the couch with our food, Rosa fixed me with a serious look.
Spillit, chica.
What happened with the Wicked Witch? I recounted my confrontation with Evelyn, ending with my declaration of independence. Rosa hooped, nearly spilling her drink. "About time," she exclaimed. "But wait, how are you going to manage without her help?" I sighed, picking at my food. "I have no idea, but I can't let her keep controlling us like this." Rosa nodded, her expression softening. "You know, this reminds me of what happened with Eli." I tensed. "How so?" "Remember how he was always trying to please Evelyn? How she'd criticize everything he did?" Rosa paused, choosing her words carefully. "And then one day, he just couldn't take it anymore." I felt a lump forming in my throat. "He left us, Rosa. He abandoned his family." "I know, honey. And that was wrong. But can you blame him for wanting to escape Evelyn's control?" Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. Had I been so focused on Eli's abandonment that I'd missed the bigger picture? I never thought of it that way, I admitted. Rosa squeezed my hand. "Maybe it's time to start looking at things differently. For Lydia's sake, and your own." As if on cue, there was another knock at the door. This time it was Grant, looking sheepish. "Sorry to bother you," he said, "but I noticed your porch light was flickering. Thought I could take a look if you want." I hesitated, then stepped aside to let him in. As Grant worked on the light fixture, I found myself opening up about the situation with Evelyn and Lydia. "That's rough," Grant said, his voice muffled as he fiddled with the wiring. "But you're doing the right thing, standing up for your daughter." "Thanks," I said, surprised by how much his support meant to me. "I just wish I knew what to do next." Grant emerged from behind the light, wiping his hands on his jeans. "Well, for starters, you've got friends who care about you. And if you need help with Lydia while you're at work, I'd be happy to pitch in." I blinked, touched by his offer. "Really? You'd do that?" He shrugged, a small smile playing on his lips. "What are neighbors for?" As Grant left, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. Maybe I wasn't as alone in this as I thought. Later that night, as I lay in bed, I found myself thinking about Eli again. Not with anger or resentment, but with a new understanding. He had been Evelyn's first victim, in a way. And while it didn't excuse his actions, it helped me see the situation more clearly. I made a silent promise to myself and to Lydia. We would break this cycle of control and manipulation. We would forge our own path, surrounded by people who truly cared for us. And maybe, just maybe, we'd find a way to heal the wounds of the past, not just for ourselves, but for our whole fractured family. The next few days were a whirlwind of work shifts and juggling Lydia's care between Rosa and Grant. But as the dust settled, I found myself drawn to the attic, where boxes of old family mementos lay forgotten. I pulled down a dusty trunk, coughing as I pried it open. Inside, I found a treasure trove of old photos, letters, and journals. As I sifted through them, a pattern began to emerge, one that made my blood run cold. There were photos of Evelyn with a young woman I'd never seen before, their smiles bright and carefree. But as I flipped through the album, the woman's presence dwindled until she disappeared entirely. A yellowed envelope caught my eye. Inside was a letter dated nearly 40 years ago. Dearest Evelyn, I can't take it anymore. Your constant criticism, your need to control every aspect of my life, it's suffocating me. I'm leaving, and I beg you not to try to find me. Please, for once, respect my decision. Your sister, Mabel. My hands shook as I read the words. Evelyn had a sister? One she'd driven away with the same controlling behavior she'd used on Eli, on me, on Lydia? I dove deeper into the trunk, uncovering more evidence of Evelyn's manipulative past. There were angry letters from old friends, journal entries detailing her obsession with molding others to her will, even a newspaper clipping about a family feud that had torn the Harpers apart decades ago. As I pieced together this hidden history, my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. Is this Cassandra Harper? My name is Mabel Thornton. I believe we need to talk about my sister, Evelyn. My heart raced as I quickly replied, setting up a video call for that evening. When Mabel's face appeared on my screen, I was struck by how much she resembled Evelyn, but her eyes were kinder, her smile genuine. Thank you for agreeing to speak with me, Mabel said, her voice warm. I've been following the Harper family from afar for years, and when I heard about what happened to your daughter, well, I knew it was time to reach out. I leaned in, hungry for answers. Mabel, I had no idea Evelyn even had a sister. What happened between you two? Mabel's expression darkened. Evelyn wasn't always like this, you know. But our mother was a harsh woman, always pushing us to be perfect. Evelyn, she internalized that pressure, started trying to control everything and everyone around her. As Mabel shared story after story of Evelyn's controlling behavior, I felt a mix of validation and horror. It was like looking at a blueprint for my own experiences with my ex-mother-in-law. I tried to stand up to her, Mabel continued, but it only made things worse. In the end, leaving was the only way I could breathe. But why are you reaching out now? I asked. Mabel's eyes filled with tears. Because I see history repeating itself. I couldn't save Evelyn from becoming our mother, but maybe I can help you protect Lydia from the same fate. We talked for hours, Mabel providing insight into Evelyn's psyche that I'd never had before. As we said our goodbyes, promising to stay in touch, I felt a strange mix of emotions: anger at Evelyn's actions, sympathy for the damaged woman behind them, and a fierce determination to break this cycle once and for all. The next morning, I sat Lydia down at the breakfast table. Honey, there's something I need to tell you about Grandma Evelyn. As I shared what I'd learned, careful to present the facts without coloring them with my own emotions, I watched Lydia's face. She moved from shock to anger to a thoughtful frown. So, what do we do now, Mom? She asked finally. I took a deep breath. I'm not sure yet, but whatever we decide, we'll do it together. No more secrets, no more letting Evelyn call all the shots. It's time we took control of our own story. Lydia nodded, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. In that moment, I knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, we'd face them as a team, stronger and wiser than ever before. As the days passed, I watched Lydia with a mixture of pride and concern. The initial shock of her shaved head had worn off, replaced by a fierce determination I'd never seen in her before. One morning, I found her standing in front of the mirror, running her hand over her stubbly scalp. You know what, Mom? She said, catching my eye in the reflection. I think I'm going to keep it short. It feels powerful. I smiled, my heart swelling. It suits you, sweetheart. You look strong. Lydia turned to face me, her expression serious. I feel strong, like I'm finally becoming who I'm supposed to be, not who Grandma Evelyn wants me to be. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. My daughter was finding her strength, but at what cost? The urge to protect her ward with a newfound respect for her resilience. Later that day, as I was leaving work, Rosa caught up with me in the parking lot. Hey, Chica. How are you holding up? I sighed, leaning against my car. Honestly, I'm not sure. Lydia's doing better than I expected, but I can't shake this anger towards Evelyn. Rosa nodded, her eyes sympathetic. "Have you thought about what you're going to do?" The question had been haunting me for days. Part of me wants to expose Evelyn's past to everyone. Let the whole community see what she's really like. But, Rosa prompted, but I don't know if that's the right thing to do. Would I be any better than her if I used her secrets as a weapon? Rosa squeezed my arm. Only you can decide that, Cassie. But remember, whatever you choose, you're not alone in this. Her words stayed with me as I drove home, my mind churning with possibilities. When I arrived, I found Gran on my porch, toolbox in hand. "Hey," he said, looking slightly embarrassed. "I noticed your gutters were clogged. Thought I'd take care of it for you." I felt a rush of warmth at his thoughtfulness. "Grant, you don't have to dash." He held up a hand, smiling. "I want to. It's what neighbors do, right?" As he worked, we chatted about Lydia's progress and my dilemma with Evelyn. Grant listened intently, his brow furrowed in concentration. "You know," he said finally, climbing down from the ladder, "my old man used to say that the best revenge is living well. Maybe instead of exposing Evelyn, you focus on building the life you and Lydia deserve." His words resonated with me, offering a perspective I hadn't considered. As we said goodbye, I felt a spark of something new, not just gratitude, but a deeper connection I wasn't quite ready to name. That night, as Lydia and I sat down for dinner, I broached the subject that had been weighing on me. "Honey, I've been thinking about Grandma Evelyn and everything that's happened." I began cautiously. Lydia looked up, her expression guarded. "What about her?" I took a deep breath. I'm torn between wanting to expose her behavior to everyone and trying to find a way to move forward without stooping to her level. "What do you think?" Lydia was quiet for a moment, pushing her food around her plate. "I'm angry at her, Mom. Really angry. But I don't think hurting her back will make things better." Her maturity stunned me. "You're right," I said softly. "So, what do we do?" Lydia's eyes met mine, filled with a wisdom beyond her years. "We live our lives. We be happy. We show her that she can't control us anymore." In that moment, looking at my brave, resilient daughter, I knew what I had to do. We wouldn't seek revenge, but we wouldn't let Evelyn's toxic influence continue either. We'd set boundaries, stand our ground, and build the life we deserved, together. As we cleared the table, a plan began to form in my mind. It wouldn't be easy, but with Lydia by my side and the support of friends like Rosa and Grant, I felt ready to face whatever came next. The turning point had arrived. It was time to rewrite our story, on our own terms. The day of the family gathering arrived, and I felt my stomach churn with anxiety. Our living room was set up for an intervention of sorts, with chairs arranged in a circle. Lydia stood by my side, her newly buzzed head held high, radiating a quiet strength. As the doorbell rang, I squeezed her hand. "Ready?" She nodded. "Let's do this, Mom." One by one, our relatives filed in. Aunt Susan, Uncle George, cousins I hadn't seen in years. Their eyes widened at Lydia's appearance, but to their credit, they said nothing. And then, there was Evelyn, her face a mask of polite confusion. "Cassandra, what's all this about?" she asked, her voice sickly sweet. Before I could answer, the final guest arrived. Mabel stepped into the room, and the air seemed to crackle with tension. Evelyn's face drained of color. "Mabel," she whispered, "what are you doing here?" I cleared my throat. "Please, everyone, have a seat. We have a lot to discuss." As everyone settled, I took a deep breath and began. "I've called you all here because it's time we address the elephant in the room. The manipulation, the control, the damage that's been done to this family for generations." Evelyn's eyes narrowed. "I don't know what you're talking about, don't you?" Mabel's voice was quiet but firm. "Sister, it's time to face the truth." Over the next hour, the floodgates opened. Mabel shared stories of Evelyn's controlling behavior from their childhood. Aunt Susan tearfully recounted how Evelyn had driven a wedge between her and her husband. Even Uncle George, usually so stoic, spoke of the constant criticism he'd endured. Through it all, Evelyn sat rigid, her face a storm of emotions. When Lydia stood to speak, the room fell silent. "Grandma," she said, her voice trembling slightly. I know you think you're helping us, but can't you see how much you're hurting everyone? How much you hurt me? Evelyn's facade finally cracked. I never meant to hurt anyone, she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. I just wanted everyone to be their best, to be perfect. But at what cost? I asked, my own voice thick with emotion. You drove Eli away. You nearly destroyed Lydia's self-esteem. When will it be enough? The room was heavy with unspoken pain and long-buried resentments. But as I looked around at my family, I saw something else too, a glimmer of hope, a chance for healing. Evelyn's shoulders sagged, the fight seeming to leave her. I don't know how to be any different, she admitted, her voice small and broken. It was Mabel who moved first, crossing the room to kneel beside her sister. It's not too late to learn, she said gently. We can help you if you'll let us. I watched as years of tension seemed to dissolve between the sisters. Evelyn reached out tentatively, grasping Mabel's hand like a lifeline. Turning to me, her eyes brimming with tears, Evelyn spoke. Cassandra, Lydia, can you ever forgive me? The room held its breath, waiting for my response. I felt the weight of generations on my shoulders, the cycle of hurt and control that had defined our family for so long. In that moment, I knew I had a choice, to perpetuate the cycle or to break it once and for all. I looked at Lydia, seeing in her eyes the same decision being made. Together, we stepped forward. It won't be easy, I said, my voice steady. There's a lot of hurt to work through, but if you're willing to try to really change, then yes, we can work on forgiveness. Lydia nodded, adding, but things have to be different, Grandma. No more controlling, no more criticism. We need to build something new. As Evelyn nodded, tears streaming down her face, I felt a shift in the room. It was as if a great weight had been lifted, allowing us all to breathe freely for the first time in years. The path ahead wouldn't be easy, but as I looked around at my family, broken, healing, but together, I knew we had taken the first step towards something better. The masks had fallen, the truth was out, and now, finally, we could begin to rebuild. The days following the family gathering were a whirlwind of emotions. I found myself oscillating between hope for a new beginning and the lingering anger from years of hurt. Lydia, ever perceptive, noticed my internal struggle. Mom, she said one evening as we sat on the porch swing, what are we going to do about Grandma Evelyn? I sighed, running a hand through my hair. I don't know, sweetie. Part of me wants to cut her out of our lives completely. Lydia was quiet for a moment, then said, but that's not really what you want, is it? Her words hit me like a thunderbolt. She was right. As much as Evelyn had hurt us, the thought of severing ties completely felt wrong. I realized then that revenge, in any form, wouldn't heal our wounds. It would only create new ones. The next day, I called a family meeting. Lydia, Evelyn, and I sat around our kitchen table, the tension palpable. I've been doing a lot of thinking, I began, my voice steadier than I felt. And I've realized something important. We can't change the past, but we can choose how we move forward. Evelyn's eyes widened, a flicker of hope crossing her face. What are you saying, Cassandra? I took a deep breath. I'm saying that I want to give you a chance to make amends. Not just for Lydia's sake, but for all of us. The room fell silent. Lydia looked at me, surprise and admiration in her eyes. Evelyn seemed to be holding her breath. But I continued, my voice firm. It won't be easy. We need to set clear boundaries. And I think we all need to start therapy, together and separately. Evelyn's lip trembled. You do that? Give me another chance. We would, Lydia chimed in, her voice strong. But things have to change, Grandma. Really change. To my surprise, Evelyn nodded vigorously. Yes, of course. I'll do anything. I don't want to lose you both. As we hashed out the details, weekly family therapy sessions, clear rules about respect and personal boundaries, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. This wasn't about forgetting the past. It was about choosing a different future. Later that evening, as I recounted the conversation to Rosa over the phone, she let out a low whistle.
Wow, chica.
That's not what I expected. Are you sure about this? I glanced out the window, where Lydia and Evelyn were tentatively working together in the garden, planting new flowers. I'm sure it won't be easy, but yes, I think this is the right path. You're a stronger woman than me, Rosa said, admiration in her voice. But I'm proud of you, Cassie. This takes real courage. As I hung up, a knock at the door startled me. It was Grant, a concerned look on his face. Hey, I saw Evelyn's car. Everything okay? I smiled, touched by his concern. Actually, yeah, we're working on it. I filled him in on our decision, watching his expression change from worry to amazement. Cassie, that's incredible. You're giving your family a real shot at healing. His words warmed me, and I felt a flutter in my chest that had nothing to do with family drama. Thank you, Grant, for everything. Your support has meant more than you know. He smiled, his eyes soft. Anytime, Cassie. I'm here, whatever you need. As he left, I turned back to watch Lydia and Evelyn in the garden. They were laughing at something, the sound carrying through the open window. It was a small moment, but it felt like the first ray of sunlight after a long storm. I knew the road ahead would be challenging. There would be setbacks, old hurts resurfacing, new boundaries to navigate. But watching my daughter and her grandmother tentatively rebuilding their relationship, I felt a surge of hope. This was our chance to break the cycle of hurt and control that had defined our family for generations. It wouldn't be easy, but as I stood there, watching the two most important women in my life begin to heal, I knew it would be worth it. The path of forgiveness and growth stretched out before us, uncertain but full of possibility. And for the first time in years, I felt truly ready to face whatever came next, not alone, but as a family, flawed but healing, together. 6 months had passed since our family's confrontation, and the change was palpable. Lydia's hair had grown into a stylish pixie cut, a physical manifestation of her newfound confidence. As I watched her laughing with her friends in our backyard, I marveled at her resilience. She's flourishing, Evelyn said softly, joining me at the window. Our relationship was still a work in progress, but the weekly therapy sessions had made a world of difference. I nodded, smiling. She really is. And so are you, Evelyn. Evelyn's eyes misted over. I never thought I could change, Cassandra. Thank you for giving me the chance. Our moment was interrupted by the doorbell. It was Grant, toolbox in hand as usual. Hey, Cassie. Just want to check if that leaky faucet is still giving you trouble. I felt a familiar flutter in my chest. Actually, I think I've got it under control. But would you like to stay for dinner? His smile lit up his face. I'd love to. As we all gathered around the dinner table, Lydia, Evelyn, Grant, and me, I was struck by how far we'd come. The tension that once defined our family dinners had been replaced by genuine warmth and laughter. Lydia regaled us with stories from her art class, where she'd started a project inspired by our family's journey. I'm calling it Roots and Wings, she explained. It's about how our past shapes us, but doesn't have to define us. Evelyn reached out, gently squeezing Lydia's hand. That's beautiful, dear. I can't wait to see it. After dinner, as Grant and I cleaned up, he turned to me with a serious expression. Cassie, I've been meaning to ask you something. My heart raced. Yes. Would you like to go out sometime? Just the two of us. I felt a smile spread across my face. I'd love that, Grant. Later that evening, as I sat on the porch swing, I reflected on the whirlwind of the past few months. Our story had spread through the community, inspiring others to confront their own family issues. I'd even started a support group for people dealing with toxic family dynamics. Lydia joined me, resting her head on my shoulder. Mom, do you ever wonder what would have happened if we'd chosen revenge instead of forgiveness? I wrapped an arm around her. Sometimes, but I think we made the right choice. Revenge might have felt good for a moment, but this feels like healing. I'm proud of us, Lydia said softly. And I'm proud of Grandma too. She's really trying. I kissed the top of her head. Me too, sweetheart. Me too. As if on cue, my phone buzzed with a text from Evelyn. Thank you for today. For everything. I love you both. Tears pricked my eyes as I showed the message to Lydia. We'd come so far from that devastating day when I'd found her with her head shaved. The road hadn't been easy, and there were still challenges ahead, but we were facing them together. I thought about Eli, wondering if he'd ever know how much we'd grown in his absence. Part of me hoped he'd find his way back to us someday, but I knew now that our happiness didn't depend on his return. As the sun set, casting a warm glow over our neighborhood, I felt a deep sense of peace settle over me. We had broken the cycle of hurt and control that had defined our family for generations. In its place, we'd built something new, a foundation of love, respect, and understanding. I looked at Lydia, her face serene in the fading light, and felt a surge of pride and love. We'd weathered the storm together, emerging stronger and more united than ever before. Whatever the future held, new challenges, deepening relationships, unexpected twists and turns, I knew we were ready to face it. Not as perfect people, but as a family committed to growth, forgiveness, and unconditional love. As the first stars appeared in the twilight sky, I made a silent promise to myself and to Lydia. We would continue to nurture these new beginnings, to cherish the hard-won peace we'd found, and to always choose love over resentment. In the end, that was the greatest revenge of all, not just surviving, but thriving, and creating a legacy of healing that would ripple out far beyond our little family. It was a new chapter, full of hope and possibility, and I couldn't wait to see where it would lead us. My name is Mallory Winters, and I've spent the last decade of my life walking on eggshells in my own home. Today, those eggshells are about to shatter. Mallory, your father's legacy doesn't belong to you alone. Alara's voice dripped with entitlement, her eyes daring me to defy her. My mother-in-law stood in the doorway of my kitchen, her perfectly manicured nails tapping an impatient rhythm on the doorframe. I gripped the edge of the counter, willing myself to stay calm. Alara, we've been through this. My father's estate is not up for discussion. Don't be selfish, dear, she cooed, her saccharine tone barely masking her irritation. Gideon is your husband. What's yours is his, and what's his is mine. The absurdity of her statement almost made me laugh. Almost. That's not how it works, and you know it. Mallory. Gideon's voice called from the living room. Is everything okay? I closed my eyes, silently praying for strength. Everything's fine, honey. Your mother and I are just chatting. Alara's lips curled into a triumphant smirk. Yes, Gideon, darling. We're having a lovely conversation about family loyalty. I bit my tongue, tasting blood. Family loyalty. As if Alara knew the meaning of the word. Look, I said, keeping my voice low, I understand you're concerned about Gideon's business. But my father's money was never meant to be a crutch for this family. Alara's eyes narrowed. Your father supported this household for years. Are you saying you're too good for his help now? No, I'm saying dash. The shrill ring of my cell phone cut through the tension. I glanced at the caller ID. Dad's lawyer. I need to take this, I said, brushing past Alara. Her hand shot out, gripping my arm. This conversation isn't over, Mallory. I yanked my arm free, my patience finally snapping. Yes, it is. Stepping onto the back porch, I answered the call. Hello. Mrs. Winters? This is Charles Blackwood, your father's attorney. I'm calling about Raymond's will. My heart clenched. It had been 3 months since Dad's passing, and the wound still felt fresh. Yes, Mr. Blackwood. What can I do for you? There's been a development. Your father left some unexpected instructions. I think it's best if we meet in person to discuss the details. I frowned, confusion and curiosity warring within me. Of course. When? Tomorrow afternoon, if possible. My office, 2 p.m. I'll be there, I promised, my mind racing. As I ended the call, I turned to find Gideon standing in the doorway, his brow furrowed with concern. Everything okay, Mal? You look pale. I forced a smile, guilt gnawing at me for the relief I felt at his presence. Just some stuff about Dad's will. Nothing to worry about, He nodded, clearly unconvinced but unwilling to push. Mom's asking about dinner plans. Should I tell her we're eating out? The thought of spending an entire meal with Alara made my stomach churn. Actually, I'm not feeling great. Why don't you two go ahead without me? Gideon's face fell, and I hated myself a little for the lie. But I needed space, time to think. If you're sure, he said, leaning in to kiss my cheek. Feel better, okay? As he turned to leave, I caught a whiff of unfamiliar perfume on his collar. My heart sank, another piece of my world threatening to crumble. I watched him go, the weight of unspoken words and mounting secrets pressing down on me. Tomorrow's meeting with the lawyer loomed large in my mind, a beacon of
What?
hope, change. One thing was certain, something had to give, and soon. The law office of Blackwood and Associates felt cold and impersonal, much like the news I was about to receive. I smoothed my skirt, trying to quell the nervous energy coursing through me. Mrs. Winters, Charles Blackwood greeted me, his tone somber. Please have a seat. I perched on the edge of the leather chair, my hands clasped tightly in my lap. Mr. Blackwood, what's this about? Has something changed with my father's will? He cleared his throat, shuffling papers on his desk. Your father, Raymond, was a complex man, Mrs. Winters. He had unconventional ideas about legacy. My heart raced. What do you mean? Your father has left you a substantial inheritance, he said, sliding a document across the desk, including a sum of $5 million and the deed to his historic family home on Maple Street. I stared at the paper, my vision blurring. $5 million? The house? But why? Blackwood's eyes softened. Raymond was proud of you, Mallory. He wanted to ensure your independence and happiness. A lump formed in my throat. Dad had always been my silent supporter. But this was beyond anything I'd imagined. There's more, Blackwood continued. The inheritance comes with a condition. The money and property are to be used at your sole discretion. No one else can make decisions regarding these assets. The implication hit me like a tidal wave. Dad had known. He'd seen the dynamics in my marriage, the constant pressure from Alara. This was his way of giving me an out. Thank you, I managed to whisper, gathering the papers with trembling hands. As I left the office, my phone buzzed incessantly. Alara, of course. I answered, bracing myself. Hello. Well, Alara's voice crackled through the speaker. What did the lawyer say? How much did Raymond leave us? The old me would have stumbled, made excuses. But something had shifted. There is no us in this situation, Alara. The inheritance is mine. Don't be ridiculous, she snapped. You know Gideon's business needs capital. This is our chance to dash. No. I cut her off, surprising myself with my firmness. This is my father's legacy, and I'll honor it as I see fit. You ungrateful little dash. I ended the call, a strange mix of terror and exhilaration flooding my veins. When I arrived home, Gideon was waiting, his face a mask of concern. Mal, what's going on? Mom's on the warpath. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. We need to talk, Gideon. About the inheritance, about us, about everything. His brow furrowed. What do you mean? Your mother wants to use my father's money for your business, I said, watching his reaction carefully. Is that what you want too? Gideon's eyes darted away, guilt written across his features. Mal, you know how tight things have been. This could be our chance to turn everything around. Our chance? I echoed, the words tasting bitter. Or your mother's chance to sink her claws deeper into our lives? That's not fair, he protested weakly. Isn't it? I countered, years of pent-up frustration bubbling to the surface. When was the last time you made a decision without consulting her? When was the last time you stood up for me? Gideon's face crumpled. I don't know what you want from me, Mal. I want a partner, I said, my voice breaking. Not someone who lets his mother dictate our lives. A heavy silence fell between us, filled with unspoken truths and shattered illusions. What are you going to do? Gideon finally asked, his voice small. I squared my shoulders, feeling a newfound strength coursing through me. I'm going to honor my father's wishes. I'm going to use this inheritance to build something meaningful. And I'm going to do it on my own terms. As the words left my mouth, I realized this wasn't just about the money or the house. This was my breaking point, the moment I chose myself over the suffocating expectations that had defined my life for so long. Gideon's face fell, realization dawning in his eyes. Mal, please. We can work this out. But I was already moving, gathering my keys and jacket. I need some time, Gideon. To think, to breathe. As I walked out the door, I felt the weight of years lifting from my shoulders. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, it felt like my own. The days following my confrontation with Gideon blurred together in a haze of tense silences and avoided glances. Our home, once a sanctuary, now felt like a battlefield where every word was a potential landmine. One morning, I found Gideon hunched over his laptop at the kitchen table, dark circles under his eyes. Another late night? I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral. He barely looked up. Mom's been helping me strategize for the business. We think we've found a way to turn things around. The casual mention of Alara sent a familiar surge of frustration through me. And what does the strategy involve? Gideon hesitated, his fingers drumming nervously on the table. Well, we were thinking, maybe we could use some of your inheritance as an investment. Just temporarily, of course. I felt the blood drain from my face. You discussed my inheritance with your mother? Mal, it's not like that. He backpedaled, finally meeting my gaze. We're family. We should be supporting each other. Family? I echoed, my voice rising. Is that what you call it when your mother constantly undermines me? When you can't make a single decision without her approval? Gideon's face hardened. That's not fair. Mom only wants what's best for us. For us? Or for her? I shot back. The argument escalated, years of pent-up resentment spilling out. Gideon's voice grew louder, more defensive with each exchange. I barely recognized the man before me, so far removed from the person I'd fallen in love with. Maybe Mom's right, he finally snapped. Maybe you're just being selfish. The words hung in the air between us, sharp and irretrievable. In that moment, I saw with painful clarity the extent of Alara's influence, how deeply it had poisoned our relationship. I need some air, I muttered, grabbing my keys and jacket. I drove aimlessly, tears blurring my vision, until I found myself outside my father's old house, now my house. The Grand Victorian stood silent and imposing, a testament to a legacy I was only beginning to understand. As I approached the front door, a voice called out from next door. Well, if it isn't Raymond's girl. I turned to see an elderly woman waving from her porch, a knowing smile on her weathered face. Mrs. Beatrice? I asked, recognizing my father's longtime neighbor. The one and only, she chuckled. Come on over, dear. You look like you could use a cup of tea and a friendly ear. Grateful for the distraction, I joined Mrs. Beatrice on her porch. As she poured tea into delicate china cups, she regaled me with stories of my father, his kindness, his quiet strength, his dreams for the community. You know, she said, her eyes twinkling, Raymond always said that house was meant for more than just one family. He had big plans for it. I leaned forward, intrigued. What kind of plans? Mrs. Beatrice smiled. He talked about turning it into a place where people could come together, where the elderly in our community could find companionship and purpose. Your father had a big heart, Mallory. He saw potential where others saw problems. As she spoke, something stirred within me, a spark of inspiration, a glimmer of possibility. I thought about the inheritance, about my father's legacy, about the suffocating life I'd been living. Mrs. Beatrice, I said slowly, an idea taking shape. What would you think about helping me bring my father's vision to life? The old woman's face lit up. Oh, honey, I thought you'd never ask. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the porch, I felt a sense of clarity I hadn't experienced in years. I knew what I had to do. Driving home, I steeled myself for the conversation ahead. Gideon was waiting, his face a mixture of guilt and apprehension. Mal, I'm sorry about earlier. I didn't mean dash. I held up a hand, cutting him off. Gideon, I've made a decision. I'm moving into my father's house. I need
Space.
time to figure things out. His face fell, but I saw a flicker of understanding in his eyes. And us. I took a deep breath. That depends on you. On whether you're ready to stand with me, or if you'll always stand with your mother. As I packed my bags, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in years, I felt like I was moving in the right direction, towards a future that was truly my own. The old Victorian creaked and groaned as I moved through its empty rooms, my footsteps echoing off bare walls. It had been a week since I'd left Gideon, and the house still felt more like a stranger than a home. But with each passing day, I could feel my father's presence growing stronger, guiding me towards something greater. I stood in what used to be the parlor, envisioning the possibilities. This could be a reading room, I murmured to myself, running my hand along the dusty mantelpiece. Talking to ghosts already? A familiar voice chuckled from the doorway. I spun around, startled. Mrs. Beatrice. I didn't hear you come in. The elderly woman shuffled into the room, her eyes twinkling with mischief. These old bones still have a few tricks up their sleeve. Now, tell me about these grand plans of yours. As we walked through the house, I shared my vision for the community center, a place where the elderly could gather, learn, and find purpose. Mrs. Beatrice listened intently, offering suggestions and sharing anecdotes about the neighborhood's needs. You know, she said, pausing by a large bay window, there's a group of us who've been meeting at the library for years. Book club, knitting circle, that sort of thing. But we've been running out of space. This could be perfect. Her enthusiasm was contagious, and for the first time since moving in, I felt a surge of excitement. Mrs. Beatrice, would you help me get the word out? I want to invite the community to be part of this from the ground up. She patted my hand, her grip surprisingly strong. Oh, honey, just you wait. We'll have this place bustling in no time. As Mrs. Beatrice left, promising to spread the word, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just about escaping Alara's influence or finding my own path. It was about honoring my father's legacy and making a real difference. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. I met with contractors, researched zoning laws, and started drafting a business plan. Each step forward felt like a small victory, reclaiming of the strength I'd lost over years of compromise. One afternoon, as I was sorting through old boxes in the attic, I came across a familiar face in a dusty photograph. Emmett, my childhood best friend, grinning beside me at some long-forgotten summer barbecue. I hadn't thought about him in years, but seeing his face brought back a flood of memories, of laughter, of understanding, of a connection untainted by manipulation or expectation. On impulse, I searched for him online, surprised to find he was living just a few towns over. Before I could talk myself out of it, I sent him a message, explaining my situation and inviting him to see the house. To my shock, he replied almost immediately. Mal, it's been too long. I'd love to catch up and see what you're up to. How's tomorrow? As I confirmed the plans, a mix of nervousness and anticipation bubbled in my chest. It felt like a lifeline to a simpler time, a reminder of who I used to be before Alara's influence had worn me down. The next day, as I waited for Emmett to arrive, my phone buzzed with a text from Gideon. We need to talk. Mom's been asking questions about the inheritance. Please call me. I stared at the screen, feeling the familiar weight of obligation settling over me. But before I could respond, the doorbell rang. I opened the door to find Emmett standing there, his smile just as warm and genuine as I remembered. Mal, he said, pulling me into a hug. It's so good to see you. As we embraced, I felt something shift inside me, a piece of the old Mallory, the one who stood up for herself and pursued her dreams, clicking back into place. Come on in, I said, leading him inside. I have so much to tell you. For the first time in years, I felt truly seen, truly heard. And as Emmett and I walked through the house, sharing ideas and laughing at old memories, I realized that this project wasn't just about creating a community center. It was about rebuilding myself, one room at a time. The community center project was gaining momentum, breathing new life into the old Victorian and into me. Each day brought new challenges and triumphs, from securing permits to organizing volunteer groups. Emmett had become a constant presence, his unwavering support and easy laughter a balm to my frayed nerves. One afternoon, as we were painting what would soon be the center's library, Emmett paused, his brush hovering mid-stroke. "Mal, you're different," he said, his eyes searching my face. "Happier, more. You." I felt a warmth spread through my chest at his words. "I feel more like myself than I have in years," I admitted, realizing the truth of it as I spoke. Our moment was interrupted by the shrill ring of my phone. Gideon's name flashed on the screen, and my stomach twisted with a mix of concern and apprehension. "I should take this," I said, stepping out onto the porch. "Mal." Gideon's voice crackled through the speaker, sounding strained. I need to talk to you. In person. It's important." Despite my reservations, I agreed to meet him at a nearby cafe. As I hung up, I caught Emmett watching me, his expression unreadable. "Everything okay?" he asked, his tone carefully neutral. I nodded, forcing a smile. "Just unfinished business. I won't be long." The cafe was bustling when I arrived, but Gideon was easy to spot, hunched over a table in the corner. As I approached, I was struck by how haggard he looked, his usual polished appearance replaced by rumpled clothes and dark circles under his eyes. "Mal," he said, relief evident in his voice. "Thank you for coming." I slid into the seat across from him, keeping my tone even. "What's going on, Gideon?" He ran a hand through his disheveled hair, his eyes darting nervously. "It's the business. Everything's fallen apart. The investors pulled out, and the bank's calling in our loans. I don't know what to do." A familiar pang of sympathy tugged at my heart, but it was quickly overshadowed by a surge of anger. "And let me guess, your mother suggested you come to me for help?" Gideon's flinch was all the confirmation I needed. "She means well, Mal. She's just trying to protect our future." "Our future?" I echoed, incredulity coloring my voice. "Gideon, we've been living separate lives for months. You chose your mother over me at every turn. And now that things have gone south, you expect me to bail you out?" His face crumpled, a mix of shame and desperation. "I know I've made mistakes. But Mal, we built this life together. Doesn't that count for something?" For a moment, I was tempted. The old Mallory, the one who bent over backwards to keep the peace, whispered that I should help him. But as I looked at Gideon, really looked at him, I saw the years of compromise, of putting my own dreams on hold for his ambitions and his mother's machinations. "I'm sorry, Gideon," I said, my voice soft but firm. "But I can't be your safety net anymore. I have my own life to build now." His expression hardened, a flash of his mother's manipulative nature shining through. "So that's it? You're just going to abandon me? After everything we've been through?" I stood, gathering my resolve. "I'm not abandoning you, Gideon. I'm choosing myself. Maybe it's time you did the same." As I walked away, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. It was a bittersweet victory, tinged with the ache of what could have been. But with each step, I felt stronger, more certain of my path. When I returned to the Victorian, Emmett was waiting on the porch, concern etched on his face. "How'd it go?" he asked gently. I took a deep breath, feeling the last vestiges of my old life falling away. "It went exactly as it needed to," I said, surprising myself with the steadiness in my voice. Emmett nodded, understanding in his eyes. "What do you need?" I looked at the half-painted walls, the piles of donated books waiting to be shelved, the plans for a garden that would bring color and life to the community. "I need to finish what I started," I said, a newfound determination coursing through me. As we walked back into the house, I felt a shift, not just in my relationship with Gideon, but in my relationship with myself. For the first time in years, I was standing on my own 2 feet, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The community center was no longer just a project. It was a testament to my resilience, a symbol of the woman I was becoming. And as I picked up my paintbrush, I knew that this was only the beginning. The grand opening of the community center was just days away, and the old Victorian buzzed with activity. Volunteers scurried about, hanging curtains and arranging furniture, while Mrs. Beatrice directed operations like a seasoned general. I stood in the midst of it all, a surge of pride warming my chest. "Mallory, dear," Mrs. Beatrice called, waving me over. "The local paper wants to do a feature on the center. Isn't that wonderful?" I nodded, excitement mingling with a twinge of apprehension. Publicity meant exposure, and exposure meant my phone buzzed, as if on cue. An unknown number. "Hello," I answered cautiously. "Is this Mallory Winters?" a gruff voice asked. "I'm calling from the city planning office. We've received some concerning reports about your property." My stomach dropped. Concerning reports? What kind of reports? Zoning violations, safety hazards. "We'll need to conduct an immediate inspection before you can open to the public." As the caller rattled off a list of alleged infractions, my mind raced. None of this made sense. We'd meticulously followed every regulation, obtained every permit. "Unless—" "I understand," I said, forcing calm into my voice. "When can we expect the inspector?" "Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. sharp." I hung up, my hands shaking. This had Alara written all over it.
Mal.
Emmett's concerned voice cut through my spiraling thoughts. "What's wrong?" I filled him in, watching his expression darken. "That manipulative witch," he muttered. "She won't stop until she's destroyed everything you've built." "Not everything," I said, a steely resolve settling over me. "Not this time." We spent the night in a frenzy of preparation, double-checking every document, every safety measure. As dawn broke, I stood on the porch, watching a sleek black car pull up. A tall man in a crisp suit emerged, his face a mask of professional detachment. "Mrs. Winters? I'm here for the inspection." I led him through the house, answering his questions with calm precision. But as we reached the second floor, a commotion erupted from outside. "You can't do this." Alara's shrill voice carried through the open window. "That house belongs to my son." My heart raced as I hurried downstairs, the inspector close behind. Outside, Alara stood toe-to-toe with Mrs. Beatrice, a small crowd of neighbors gathering to watch. "Your son," Mrs. Beatrice scoffed. "Honey, this house belongs to Mallory, and she's doing more good with it than your family ever did." Alara's face contorted with rage. "You don't know anything. This community center is a sham. It's unsafe, it's illegal, and I won't stand by while dash." "While what, Alara?" I interrupted, stepping onto the porch. "While I use my inheritance the way my father intended. While I build something that actually helps people." She whirled on me, eyes flashing. "You ungrateful little dash." "That's enough." The inspector's authoritative voice cut through the tension. He turned to me, his expression softening slightly. "Mrs. Winters, I've seen enough. Your center not only meets but exceeds all safety and zoning requirements. You're clear to open as scheduled." A cheer went up from the gathered neighbors. Alara's face drained of color as she realized her plan had backfired spectacularly. "You haven't heard the last of this," she hissed, but her words lacked their usual venom. As she stormed off, I felt a hand on my shoulder. Emmett stood beside me, a mixture of pride and concern in his eyes. "You okay?" I took a deep breath, surveying the scene before me. Mrs. Beatrice was regaling the neighbors with a blow-by-blow account of her confrontation with Alara. The inspector was chatting amiably with a group of volunteers. And through the open door, I could see the center, my father's legacy, my own dream, ready to welcome its first visitors. "You know what?" I said, a smile spreading across my face. "I'm better than okay. I'm free." As the crowd dispersed and we headed back inside to finish preparations, I felt a shift in the air. Alara's desperate attempt to sabotage the center had only strengthened my resolve and united the community behind me. The grand opening was no longer just a celebration of the center. It was a declaration of independence, a testament to the power of choosing oneself. And as I looked at Emmett, at Mrs. Beatrice, at all the people who had rallied around this project, I knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, I wouldn't face them alone. The reckoning had come, and I had emerged stronger for it. Now it was time to build the future, on my terms. The grand opening of the community center was a resounding success. Laughter and chatter filled the once empty rooms, elderly residents exploring their new haven with gleaming eyes. As I watched Mrs. Beatrice lead a lively tour group, pride swelled in my chest. This was everything my father had dreamed of, everything I had fought for. Mallory. A familiar voice cut through the joyous din. I turned to see Gideon standing in the doorway, looking lost and out of place. "Gideon," I said, surprise coloring my tone. "I didn't expect to see you here." He shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting around the room. "Can we talk? Privately?" Nodding, I led him to the small office I'd set up in the back of the house. As I closed the door behind us, the muffled sounds of the celebration faded away, leaving a heavy silence. "What is it, Gideon?" I asked, crossing my arms. He took a deep breath, running a hand through his disheveled hair. I've left my mother's house. I've been thinking a lot about everything that's happened, about the choices I've made." My heart quickened, a mix of hope and wariness coursing through me. And I realize now how wrong I've been," he said, his voice cracking. "How I let my mother control me, control us."
I'm so sorry, Mal.
"For everything." Before I could respond, the door burst open. Alara stormed in, her face contorted with rage. "There you are," she spat at Gideon. "How dare you abandon me like this? After everything I've done for you?" Gideon flinched, but stood his ground. "Mother, please. This has to stop. You can't keep manipulating us like this." Alara's eyes narrowed, her gaze shifting between Gideon and me. "Us? There is no us anymore. She left you, remember? She chose this ridiculous project over her own family." "No, Mother," Gideon said, his voice growing stronger. "You drove her away. You've been driving everyone away for years with your schemes and your control." I watched in stunned silence as Gideon, for the first time in our marriage, stood up to his mother. Alara's face paled, her carefully constructed facade crumbling. "How can you say that?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "Everything I've done for you." "No," Gideon countered, shaking his head. "You did it for yourself. To keep me dependent on you, to keep Mallory under your thumb. But it ends now." Alara's eyes flashed dangerously. "You ungrateful child. I gave you everything." "You gave me nothing but fear and insecurity," Gideon shot back. "Mallory showed me what real love and support look like. She built this place, helped all these people, while you were busy tearing everything down." As mother and son faced off, years of resentment and manipulation bubbling to the surface, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. This was the confrontation we'd been hurtling towards for years, the moment of truth that would define our futures. "Enough," I said quietly, but with enough force to silence them both. They turned to me, as if suddenly remembering I was there. "Alara, you're not welcome here. Not after everything you've done to sabotage this place, to sabotage me." Alara's mouth opened and closed, but for once, she seemed at a loss for words. "And Gideon," I continued, meeting his gaze, "I appreciate your apology, and I'm proud of you for standing up to your mother. But it doesn't erase the years of hurt and neglect." His face fell, but he nodded in understanding. "I know. I don't expect you to forgive me overnight. I want a chance to make things right, to support you the way I should have all along." I took a deep breath, weighing my words carefully. "I can't promise anything, Gideon, but I'm willing to try, on my terms." As Alara stormed out, muttering threats and curses, Gideon and I shared a look of cautious hope. The air felt lighter somehow, as if a poisonous fog had finally lifted. Outside the office, the sounds of laughter and conversation reminded me of the new life I'd built, the community I'd fostered. Whatever happened with Gideon, whatever challenges lay ahead, I knew I had the strength to face them. For the first time in years, the future felt wide open, full of possibility. And I was ready to embrace it on my own terms. 6 months had passed since the confrontation with Alara, and the community center had blossomed beyond my wildest dreams. The once empty rooms now buzzed with activity, art classes, book clubs, and lively discussions filling every corner of the old Victorian. As I walked through the garden, where residents tended to raised beds bursting with vegetables and flowers, I caught sight of Mrs. Beatrice leading a Tai Chi class on the lawn. Her movements were slow but graceful, a far cry from the frail woman I'd first met. "Looking good, Mrs. B," I called out, earning a wink and a wave from the spirited octogenarian. "All thanks to you, dear," she replied, not missing a beat in her routine. "This place has given us all a new lease on life." I smiled, warmth spreading through my chest. This was my father's legacy, realized in ways I never could have imagined. As I made my way back inside, I spotted Gideon chatting with a group of veterans in the common room. Over the past months, he'd become a regular volunteer, slowly rebuilding trust and finding his own place in this community we'd created. Our relationship was different now, no longer husband and wife, but partners in a shared vision. It wasn't always easy, but it was honest in a way it had never been before. Emmett's voice pulled me from my thoughts. He jogged up, a mischievous glint in his eye. "You'll never guess who just called."
Who?
"The mayor's office. They want to use our center as a model for a citywide program. They're talking about funding, expansion, the works." I gasped, my mind reeling with the possibilities. "Emmett, that's incredible. We could help so many more people, create a real change in the community." He grinned, pulling me into a tight hug. "We already have, Mal. You already have." As we broke apart, I caught the softness in his gaze, the unspoken something that had been growing between us. It was new and fragile, but filled with promise, much like the life I'd built for myself. Later that evening, as the sun dipped low on the horizon, I found myself alone in my father's old study. The room had become my sanctuary, a place to reflect and recharge. I ran my fingers along the spines of his books, pausing at a worn copy of his favorite poem. As I pulled it from the shelf, a folded piece of paper fluttered to the floor. With trembling hands, I unfolded it, recognizing my father's handwriting immediately. "My dearest Mallory, if you're reading this, it means you've found your way back to yourself. I always knew you had the strength to break free from the chains that bound you, whether they were of your own making or placed upon you by others. This house, this legacy, was never meant to be a burden. It was a gift, a chance for you to discover your own power and purpose. I see now that you've done just that, in ways more beautiful than I could have imagined. Remember, my darling girl, that true strength lies not in standing alone, but in lifting others up alongside you. You've created a community, a family bound not by blood, but by shared dreams and compassion. I am so proud of you, Mallory, not for what you've built, but for who you've become. All my love, Dad." Tears streamed down my face as I clutched the letter to my chest. In that moment, I felt my father's presence more strongly than I had since his passing. A soft knock at the door pulled me back to the present. Emmett stood in the doorway, concern etched on his face. "Everything okay?" I nodded, wiping my eyes and managing a watery smile. "Better than okay. I finally understand what all of this was meant to be." As I shared the letter with Emmett, his arm wrapped comfortingly around my shoulders, I felt a profound sense of peace settle over me. The journey had been long and often painful, but it had led me exactly where I needed to be. Outside, the sounds of laughter and conversation drifted up from the garden, where residents and volunteers were gathering for the weekly community dinner. "My community, my family, shall we?" Emmett asked, offering his hand. I took it, feeling the warmth of his palm against mine. "Let's go home," I said, realizing that for the first time in my life, I truly understood what that word meant. As we walked downstairs to join the others, I carried with me the weight of my father's approval, the lightness of my newfound freedom, and the strength of the bonds I'd forged. Whatever challenges lay ahead, I was ready to face them, not as the woman I once was, but as the woman I'd become. A woman who had learned to stand on her own, to lift others up, and to create a legacy of love and compassion that would ripple out far beyond the walls of this old Victorian house. This was my new dawn, and it was more beautiful than I ever could have imagined.